Welcome to the March 2016 Animal Health webinar. We are pleased you have been able to join us. I am Deborah Cole, coordinator of the Master of Agribusiness program, and we will hear from Stacy Pursell in our webinar today. The MAB program is an executive distance-based program offering food and business training to professionals working full-time in the food, agriculture, and animal health sectors. Our animal health cohort is comprised of students who are practice managers, veterinarians, individuals working in nutrition, feed, pharmaceuticals, vaccinology, education, and government. The program is built to facilitate earning a master's degree without career interruption, and our students participate in 2 one-week face-to-face campus sessions at the beautiful K-State Olathe campus located in the Kansas City metro area. We are currently taking applications for our August 2016 cohort, and we would encourage you to visit www.mab.ksu.edu for more information regarding the animal health cohort at K-State. Some housekeeping items for our webinar. There will be some time for questions at the end, and we will open the chat feature at that time. If you have questions that arise during the webinar, we would encourage you to tweet them with the hashtag #MABWebinar. We will enter them into the queue. Contact information for both Stacy and the program will be listed at the end of the webinar today. We are making a recorded archive of this webinar, and we will give you access to that at the end of the webinar today. We have with us today Stacy Pursell, who is an internationally respected executive search consultant and recruiter with 18 years of experience in the top 1% of executive recruiters worldwide. Stacy builds world-class animal health, animal nutrition, animal science, veterinary, pet food, pet product, agribusiness, and life science industry organizations. She is a talent scout and workforce expert for these industries and is the founder and CEO of the VetRecruiter, a leading search firm in these industries. Stacy, I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Deborah, and welcome, and I'm glad that you could join us for today's webinar, everyone. It's great to be here. And as Deborah mentioned, I have 18 years in executive search and recruiting. I've placed hundreds of professionals in the animal health and veterinary space, and I've worked with thousands of professionals throughout my career. At some point, you are probably going to find yourself in a career transition. People work for multiple organizations throughout their career. In fact, the average person changes jobs 5 to 7 times throughout their career. And the younger generations will change jobs more frequently than that, sometimes every 18 months to 2 years. Younger generations have less loyalty to companies, and most people don't retire with a gold watch after 50 years of service anymore. I have a story to illustrate that. I have an uncle who's in his 70s, and he retired, but he used to be a rocket scientist. He used to literally build spacecraft for NASA. He worked for Boeing and McDonnell Douglas. And he was working for one of those companies, and he got a call from a recruiter, and he transitioned to a competing organization. And his grandfather sat him on the bed, and he said, "Son, we don't change companies like that. We're very loyal people, and that's not the thing to do." And I laugh when I think about that story because that's not the marketplace that we're in anymore. Like I said, the average person changes jobs 5 to 7 times throughout their career. So you might be in the midst of a career transition right now, or you could be thinking about one today, and that might be the reason that you're on today's call. If that is the case, it is my hope that you will find today's webinar valuable, and you will be able to use the information presented today to move to the next stage in your career. Before we go further, I would like to reference a book titled Be Hunted by Smooch Reynolds. And yes, Smooch is the real name of the author. This is an excellent book that I believe every career professional should read. It's been around for a number of years, but it's got some really good information. In the book, the author emphasizes the fact that a search consultant does work for an employer and not for a candidate. First and foremost, a search consultant works to meet their client's needs or the employer's needs, and that means finding and recruiting the best fits for their clients' job openings. Now, that does not mean that a search consultant does not want to help candidates. They absolutely do. They want it to be a win-win for both parties, both the client and the candidate, and their first priority, however, is to meet the needs of their clients. According to Hunt Scanlon Media, search consultants are part of a $10 billion a year executive recruiting industry. And as we'll discuss later, more than 60% of all executive level positions are filled through search consultants. These statistics show why it is so important for you to have a relationship with a search professional in your career. It is truly one of the most important relationships that you can establish as you navigate your career. If companies could find talent on their own, they would not be willing to spend $10 billion a year to hire recruiting firms to help them land important talent. A search consultant can help you in one of two ways. First, when the time is right, they can help you to find a better employment opportunity for yourself. And second, if you have advanced to a position of management within your employer, they can help you to recruit talented people for your organization. Now, I'd like to discuss some facts and some myths about the job market. And I'll start with the facts first, and there are three main ones. So right now, sorry, I thought my slides were out of order. Okay, so right now, more and more people are competing for fewer jobs. It is true that the economy has been growing since the Great Recession, and it's also true that many of the jobs that were lost during the recession have been replaced. However, the population has also increased during that time with more people entering the workforce. And not only are there more people competing for jobs, there are also more and more people competing for the best jobs in the marketplace. What everyone wants is a great job, and there is a lot of competition for the best jobs out there. So not only are more and more people competing for the best jobs, but many of these positions are also not advertised online. As a search consultant, I have personally filled numerous jobs before they were posted online, and many of these jobs were never posted online. They were not posted anywhere. If the job is not posted online, then you might not have access to them, and you can't apply for them if you're not aware of them. Sometimes, by the time you see a job posting advertised, that position may already be filled. Even if you do see a great job posted online, it might be close to being filled. And when you leave yourself at the mercy of job postings, there are many variables that are out of your control. And as we talk about in point 2, some of these opportunities are not posted at all. And this is another reason why relying on online job postings will only take you so far with your job search. Now that we've discussed some facts about the job market, let's also turn to the myths. There is one big myth that I want to address, and that is job security. In today's marketplace, there is simply no such thing as job security. There are no guarantees that the job that you have today will be there tomorrow. And even if you're happy in your current situation, it is in your best interest to keep your options open and be receptive to other employment opportunities. So that brings us to recruiters and the role that they fill in the employment marketplace. One of the biggest questions that you might have about search firms or recruiters is a simple question: why do companies hire them? To help answer this question, I'd like to relay my own personal experience. The first time I became aware about the executive search and recruiting industry was when I was in college attending Oklahoma State University and working for the school newspaper. The editor of our paper sent me out to cover a story because OSU was getting a new president, and the college hired a search firm to find the president. And I thought it was very intriguing, and I thought, why can't the school find their own president? Why do they need to hire another company to conduct a search to find the new president? So the editor sent me out to interview the dean who was in charge of the search committee, and I asked him questions and learned a great deal about the search process. And what I learned that day fascinated me and planted a seed in my mind about the search profession. So my experience in college helps to illustrate why companies or universities or any organization hires recruiting firms. There are two main reasons. The first reason is talent. Companies want to hire the best and the most qualified candidates to work for them. But unless those candidates are unhappy with their current employer or unless they're unemployed, they may not even be looking for a new job. In fact, most of the time, these candidates are rather content where they are. They're happily employed, they're highly regarded, they're busy, they're making good money, and they're happy in their current position, so they're not looking. However, that does not mean that they would not be open to considering a new position. Like most people, they want greater opportunity and advancement in their career. Companies find it difficult to identify and successfully recruit these candidates. It's not easy, and it can be labor intensive, especially if they don't have the expertise or experience to do that. And that's why companies hire search firms to find and recruit the best candidates away from their current employer. Another reason is confidentiality. From a company's perspective, there is only one thing that's better than hiring the best candidates in the marketplace, and that is hiring the best candidates when no one knows that they're doing it. They're hiring under the radar. Specifically, they don't want their competition to know what they're up to. And there's a major reason for this, because the candidate or the candidates they're attempting to hire could be working for one or more of their competitors. This could also be the case when a company is trying to expand into a new area, or if they're trying to replace an underperformer. They usually do not want to let that underperformer go until they have found a suitable replacement. And that is where search consultants enter the picture. They have more access to the top candidates in the marketplace, and they also have the time, energy, resources, and know-how to conduct the search in a confidential way. As an example, last year I was working with an organization in the consumer packaged goods space who wanted to enter the veterinary channel. They knew that the competition was stiff, and they did not want their competitors to know that they were going to be getting into the veterinary space. So they hired our firm to help build their sales organization under the radar, and they wanted to have the new sales force hired, in place, and trained, and they wanted it to be a surprise to their competition. So these jobs were not advertised online. The company did not advertise them. We were not allowed to advertise them. We had to conduct the search in a very discreet manner. So now that we have discussed why companies do hire search consultants, let's address some of the reasons why you as a career professional need to get on a search consultant's radar. To help answer that question, let's look briefly at the history of the search profession. It dates back to the post-World War II era. It was during this time that America had returned to prosperity, and that resulted in a tight labor market. That led for the need for companies to hire a third party to scour the landscape for talent at competing organizations. And this means that search consultants have become the gatekeepers for some of the nation's top jobs today. When a company wants to fill an important, especially a high-level executive position, they will often call upon the services of a search consultant. And remember, I mentioned earlier in the webinar that more than 60% of executive-level positions are filled through search consultants. So for you to know about some of the best jobs in your industry, it's important to have a relationship with a good search consultant who knows your industry. But to take it a step beyond that, your relationship with the recruiter is one of the most crucial relationships you will have as you navigate your career. So when should you establish a relationship with a recruiter? The short answer is long before you need one. You might think that you don't even need to talk with a recruiter because you have a good job right now, but as we talked about earlier, job security is a myth. And not only that, but if you're not completely satisfied with your current position, would you not be open to at least hearing about new employment opportunities from time to time, especially if they could be better than the situation that you have now? So I have learned throughout my career that everybody basically falls into two categories. Either you're going to retire with your current organization, or you're going to eventually make a move and take another position within another organization. So which of those two categories do you fall into at the moment? Here are two really good reasons why you should build a relationship with a search consultant right now. The first reason is they have more contacts with hiring managers than any individual could possibly have. In fact, they have worked with some of these hiring managers for years and have years of established working relationships with them. And two, as we've discussed, some of the most attractive jobs are not always posted online or anywhere else. And sometimes the only way to find out about these hidden jobs and apply for them is through a search consultant. So that brings another question. How do you get on a search consultant's radar and get noticed by them? There are two main ways. The first way is to be known in your field. And there are some different ways that you can do this. That includes joining industry associations, writing articles for trade journals, participating in social networking sites, especially business ones like LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn, I would highly recommend that you join it. And if you're a well-known entity, then search consultants will seek you out. However, the second thing that you can do is search consultants are not finding you. You can seek out a search consultant. And you'll want to look for someone who is experienced with a proven track record of success in your industry. And you can ask your colleagues and friends to provide referrals of search firms who they've worked with in the past. The key is that you want to be proactive. And remember, don't wait until you need a search firm before you reach out to one and build a relationship with them. So now I'd like to reference another book by Harvey McKay titled Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. And this is another book that every professional needs to read. By most estimates, you can only live 3 days without water. So in a literal sense, you would have to dig your well before you were thirsty or you run the risk of death. In the figurative sense, when you're unemployed, you need a job right now. However, just like digging a well, it also takes some time to find a better job. A better job is not going to fall into your lap because you're suddenly unemployed. So look at it this way. A recruiter can help you dig your well. The worst time to look for a job is when you find yourself unemployed. The best time to look for another job is when you have a job and you can strategically look for job opportunities to advance your career. And you have more leverage in that situation when you're employed and you have a good job because you only have to leave for a better job. But when you're unemployed, that's the worst time because you don't have leverage and you can become in a more desperate situation. So you don't want to wait to find a search consultant. You'll want to build a relationship with one now and dig your well before you're thirsty. So once you get on a search consultant's radar and they know that you exist and you're attempting to build a relationship with them, what is next? I'm going to present two lists now. One is a list of things that you should do when working with a search consultant, and the other list is a list of things not to do. So first, there are 8 things that you should do when working with a search consultant. Number 1, you'll want to treat the search consultant just like you would treat a hiring authority. Search consultants are your doorway to better opportunities just like a hiring authority would be. Your positive interaction with a search professional is one of the most intelligent strategies in today's competitive marketplace. As a result, every call and interaction should be positive in nature, and that means being prompt, being open, and being honest and transparent about your career goals and where you are currently in your career. I recently sent out the same message to a number of individuals, asking them if they knew someone who might be a good fit for a particular job. And I sent out probably 22 emails, and most people replied. A couple did not reply, but most of them, or in fact all of them, were very positive and helpful responses, except for this one. So this person responded and he said, "Wow, so you are sending me an email to ask me if I know someone who could fill this position. Has it ever crossed your mind that I might be qualified for this position? I recommend that you review your whole paradigm of mass email phishing expedition." So the second person responded, "Stacy, I'm sorry that I'm not on LinkedIn as much, and I hope you get this reply. I am not movable, but if it's the place that you reference, it's one of my former places of employment in a great group of people. I am happy to recommend to you one of our young pathologists who remains interested in pursuing academic opportunities and would be interested in relocating." As you might have already guessed, I will remember the second response in a more positive fashion, and when this person reaches out to me in the future and asks for my help, I will remember her willingness to help and the great attitude that she had. So the next thing to know is to send your resume, because a search consultant is not going to remember as much about your skills and accomplishments and qualifications unless they have your resume on file. It is important that you invest some time and energy into constructing your resume. And here are some tips for constructing your resume in the right way. You'll want to, of course, be sure that it contains your name, your contact information, and your address. And you don't necessarily need to include your street address, but you should at least provide a city and a state. Your address is important in case relocation is an issue, and we are getting so many resumes in our firm with no addresses right now, and I am more likely to call a candidate who has their location on the resume, because if they don't have their location and I don't know where they're located and the company's not providing relocation assistance, I may not have time to reach out and ask the person where they currently reside. So it's important to at least have a city and a state on your resume. You should also include your email address, since email correspondence is commonplace during the hiring process. You will not want to include a mission statement or an objective statement. Instead, use an executive or professional summary. If you state your mission or objective, it might not line up perfectly with the organization's mission and their current job openings. But if you list an executive summary or a professional summary, it might more closely align with the company's expectations. When listing your work history, you'll want to list it in reverse chronological order and make the work history as relevant as you can to your job search. And I also recommend tailoring the resume to the specific job for which you're applying. And we have candidates that will send us several versions of their resume if they're applying for various positions. So you don't want to use any unusual formatting, such as putting a photo or a funny cartoon, because the resumes are going into an applicant tracking system. And if your resume is strangely formatted, it might not be imported, or even if it gets imported, it might be difficult to find it later on. I know there are different opinions on this, but I personally recommend sending your resume in a Word document instead of a PDF. And the reason for this is there are many different types and versions of PDFs, and sometimes there can be formatting problems. The IT company that we use and hosts our applicant tracking system, the company hosts 200 search firms' applicant tracking systems. And I've talked to the owner many times about this, and he said every firm that he hosts would prefer to have a Word version than a PDF. A lot of people think that having their resume in a PDF makes it more secure, but that's not the case, because all you have to do is buy a converter and then you can convert it from PDF to Word. And we have to do that actually in our firm whenever we get PDF resumes. We usually have to convert them to Word to get them to fit properly into our applicant tracking system. And sometimes during the conversion process it can change the formatting and then the resume doesn't look as good. I also recommend the maximum length of your resume should be 2 pages, because most recruiters and hiring managers only spend about 30 seconds looking at an individual resume. And if it's 3 or 4 pages, they'll lose interest quickly. And I know it's different in academia because they do want to see publications and lists of research and et cetera, but I'm talking specifically about a resume today. More than 2 pages is too long, and it's going to lose people's interest. So the next thing that you'll want to do is present yourself in a credible manner. This is all about personal branding, and that is because companies want to hire people who do 2 main things: exceed expectations and produce exceptional results. I have a recent example of someone who did not present themselves in a credible manner. I reached out to a person about an opportunity, and he said he was interested and that he would send his resume by 5 o'clock, and he would call me by 5 o'clock that evening. He did not follow through. He did not send his resume, and by 7 p.m. he had not called. So he said he was going to do 2 things: send his resume and call by a certain time, and he did neither one of those things. And as a result, he lost credibility, because that's not the way to start a relationship with a recruiter. It's actually not the way to start a relationship with anyone. A search consultant's reputation is ultimately on the line, so they want to present candidates who are both reliable and dependable. And if somebody is not reliable or dependable, the search consultant is not going to want to put them forward in front of their client's organization. The next thing is you'll want to practice full disclosure when working with a search consultant. You'll want to be completely upfront and transparent about your current employment situation. And that means sharing any and all relevant facts, including your search efforts up to this point, your earnings history, and the real reason that you're looking for a new opportunity. One thing not to do is to say that you're employed when you're actually not, because all a search consultant has to do is make a couple of phone calls to find out if the person is really employed. This just happened recently. I was talking with a candidate who gave the impression that he was currently employed. However, the next call I received was from his employer, who told me that the company had just gone through some layoffs. And the employer gave me a list of people who had been affected by these layoffs, and the candidate's name, who I had just talked to, was on the list. It's better to be upfront and honest at the beginning of the process and tell the truth. And a search consultant is going to be more interested and able to help you if you're truthful and transparent. And being laid off is not something that you should be ashamed of. It's actually becoming rare for someone to go through their whole career without getting laid off at least once. So what you don't want to do is misrepresent yourself as being employed when you're not. So why must you provide all the information up front that we discussed? There are three main reasons. Number one, it helps a search consultant to match appropriate opportunities to your background and qualifications. Two, it helps the search consultant present your background accurately to the employer. They definitely want to present accurate information to the employer. And number three, it helps avoid any potential misunderstandings. The search consultant's job and their goal is to arrive at a win-win situation for both parties, both their client, the employer, and the candidate. After all, it is in their best interest to help negotiate a fair package for the candidate and the employer and to build a long-term relationship with both. And this is especially true for search consultants who are in it for the long haul. For them, it's all about relationships. They want repeat business, and building authentic relationships is how they do that. Number five, you'll want to be sure to keep certain information confidential. While you should practice full disclosure, like we talked about with the search consultant, you should also at the same time want to keep some information about your job search confidential. And I'm talking about information related to your job search activity. So keeping your search confidential is ultimately in your own best interest. So be careful what information you share with your friends and colleagues. I personally recommend that people don't share with their friends and colleagues that they're looking for another position or that they're working with a search consultant, because it could jeopardize their current situation. And another reason, it's a very small industry, especially in the animal health and veterinary world, and you might be applying for a position and your colleague or your friend might be applying for the same position. So you don't want to give that person an edge by tipping your hand. So you want to keep everything open with the search consultant, but be careful about what you share with other people. And if it's a confidential search, you don't want to publicize it. You'll want to keep it to yourself, and it will be better for you in the long run. Also, when you're working with a search consultant, they may share confidential information with you during the search process that they don't want shared with other people because they're trying to keep the situation confidential. So you'll want to respect that confidentiality as well. So the sixth thing to remember is to add value beyond your candidacy. Companies want candidates who can add value as employees, and they want search consultants who will add value by presenting great candidates. This is especially important to remember if you're not a viable candidate for an open position, either because you're not interested or because you're not qualified for the current opening. If that's the case, you'll want to strive to help the search consultant with the process. And one way you can do this is by giving the name of someone else who might be qualified for the position, because search consultants are more likely to call helpful cooperative candidates first when an opportunity presents itself. And we saw a great example of that earlier in today's webinar. I reached out to the person about an opportunity, and that person helped me by providing the name of someone else who they thought would be a good candidate. And as I mentioned earlier, I will remember that person the next time I have a job that would be a good fit for them. And I'm less likely to reach out to the other person who was negative with their response. Number 7, you'll always want to tell the truth. And this might seem like a no-brainer, but you would be surprised by how many candidates fail to tell the truth during the recruiting and hiring process. We just talked about someone who pretended to be employed but was not. So you'll want to be honest about everything, including your work history, your qualifications, and your accomplishments. And not providing relevant information can be just as bad as providing false information. Sometimes search consultants will conduct stealth reference checks on candidates to verify the information that they're telling them is correct. So if candidates are not being open and honest and they're withholding information or stretching the truth about themselves and their qualifications, oftentimes that will be exposed and then their candidacy could be nullified. And so then the search consultant will not be inclined to work with them again in the future because they had wasted their time. And of course, no one likes to have their time wasted. Number 8, like what we talked about earlier, is you'll want to follow through on your promises. Start with the fact that the quickest way to build trust with someone is to do what you say that you're going to do. And that brands you as both dependable and reliable. Keep in mind that you are competing against other candidates in the job market, and if you fail to follow through, it will reflect poorly upon you. And time is of the essence. We just talked about with the candidate who said he was going to send his resume and call, and he did not follow through on either. He should have at least had the professional courtesy to follow up instead of making promises that he could not keep. So if he changed his mind, for example, and decided he wasn't interested, he could have at least sent an email and say, I've changed my mind, I'm not interested, instead of just not following through. And keep in mind that a company wants to fill its position quickly with the very best candidates in the marketplace. So you'll want to make yourself available. If you say that you can make a phone call or an interview meeting, make sure that you follow through. If you promise, be sure that you are able to do so. So our next list are 7 things that you should not do when working with a search consultant. Number 1, I recommend that you do not pay a search consultant to find you a job. There are 2 types of search consultants, one that gets paid by the candidate and one that's paid by the employer. In my opinion, the most reputable search firms are the ones who are paid by the employer, and there are plenty of those operating in every industry. These search consultants are paid by the employer for helping those organizations fill their open positions with the best candidates. And they don't get paid by the candidate or ask the candidates for money. And by the way, search consultants cannot make money from both parties. So if a search consultant is receiving payment from the employer, they cannot also receive payment from the candidate. The second thing to know is don't expect to know how a search professional got your name. Search consultants deal in confidentiality, and that's part of the value that they provide to everyone that they work with. If you did not contact a search consultant yourself, how they got your name is really not that important. But you should actually consider it as a compliment because somebody provided your name as a reference because they probably thought very highly of you. What is important is that the search consultant could have a potentially better employment opportunity for you, and they wouldn't be talking with you if they didn't think so. Now, that doesn't automatically mean that it's an ideal situation for you. However, it's a good idea to at least be open to hearing about the opportunity. And after all, it doesn't cost you anything to explore it. It's always good to know what else is out there. And I always tell my candidates that they don't have to make a decision about whether they're going to change jobs unless they have an offer in hand. But if it lines up, if the position lines up well with their qualifications and especially with their career goals, it's always a good idea to check it out. I always tell them, don't say no before you know what you're saying no to. And I have a story about this. I have a candidate who was working for a major competitor of one of our client companies, and he was very happy in his current position. And when I approached him about another opportunity, he said no, he was very happy where he was. But I convinced him to talk with my client, and even though it was a 6-month-long interview process, which is very rare, he received an offer of an employment and accepted it. And with the pay raise he received, he was able to pay off his debt. He and his wife were able to have a baby. They were able to start saving money for their baby's future, and they were able to buy their first home. And so even though that example was from a number of years ago, he still thanks me to this day for helping him to get that job. And he said the decision had a tremendous impact, not just on his personal not just on his professional life, but also on his personal life too. So the next thing to know is don't accept an interview with a company unless you are truly interested in the opportunity. And it's okay. You're not going to be interested in every job that a search consultant presents to you. It's just not possible for you to be interested in every opportunity. However, if you say that you do want to interview, make sure that you are committed and make sure that you are truly interested in the opportunity. What you don't want to do is accept an interview for a position that you're not really interested in. Or you don't want to accept an interview to go on a free trip to the city where your relatives live or take a mini vacation. And I say this because, yes, these things have happened and they have had a detrimental effect on the candidates involved. We had a candidate a number of years ago who had gone out. He was living in the Midwest, and he accepted an interview with one of our clients in the New York City area, and he went on the interview. The job itself was a good fit, but I did not learn later that the candidate had no intentions of relocating to New York City, but he accepted a second interview with our client company because they invited him back and they invited him to bring his wife, and they really rolled out the red carpet. They put him up in a really nice hotel. They took him to a Broadway show. They took him to a nice dinner, and he actually shared with me later when he got back home that he never had any intentions of moving to New York City, but he was very interested in taking his wife on that second trip, and they literally used it to get a free weekend vacation. So that reflected very poorly on him and also on me, so I did not contact him in the future with other opportunities. The next thing to know is don't think that you're a candidate for every position that the search consultant has. As I mentioned before, it's not possible for you to be interested in every job that a search consultant brings to your attention. It's also not possible for you to be a viable candidate for every job that they have open. So don't feel like you need to do not feel like you need to manipulate your background in an attempt to be a fit for a specific job. Search consultants literally interview thousands of professionals a year, and they'll know whether or not a candidate is truly qualified. You don't want to circumvent the search consultant and call the potential employer yourself. When a search consultant reaches out to you with a new opportunity, you will want to work directly with the search consultant and not go around them. And sometimes candidates will think to themselves, if I could only speak directly with the hiring manager, I could convince them of what a great candidate I am. And this actually happened a few weeks ago. A candidate who I introduced to one of our hiring managers had a phone interview with the hiring manager, and it went really well. And the hiring manager asked me to get back in touch with this candidate to invite her on a second interview with the company. So she went on to the company website and noticed that there was another position that was a higher level role than the one that I had reached out to her about. And so she picked up the phone and called the hiring manager and said she was interested in this other role, which was a director role, and I had presented her for a management position. So she actually called the hiring manager on his cell phone after hours, and he was not happy about this, and he actually called me and said they were going to not consider the candidate any longer because he thought that that was unprofessional. And so when companies are working with search consultants, they're relying heavily upon the judgment of the search consultants who they hire. And when candidates go around the recruiter that the client trusts and is working with and they contact the client themselves, sometimes they are not able to be considered for the position any longer, and then sometimes they get taken off the list of candidates that the search consultant contacts in the future. Also, when working with a search consultant, you don't want to be what I call a stalker candidate. Showing persistence is a good thing. Persistence is often needed during a job search. However, there is a fine line between persistence and annoyance. So if a search consultant does not return your calls immediately, then it means your background is probably not suited for the firm's current searches today. And it may take some time for them to get back with you because their priority is to fill their clients' current job openings that are needing to be filled immediately today. So stalking the search consultant is not a good idea, but don't think that because they haven't gotten back to you right away, don't think that that doesn't mean that they're not interested. Just be patient, and if they have the right opportunity down the road, then I'm sure they'll get in touch with you. If you don't get the position, don't write the search consultant a nasty note. If you don't get the job, you might be hurt and disappointed, and those are, of course, natural emotions that result from the feeling of being rejected. But keep in mind that when you go through an interview process, only one candidate can be selected. And if you don't get the position, it is not the search consultant's fault. Oftentimes, they have no control over the person the company actually hires, and sometimes they don't have a whole lot of influence either. Their job is to present qualified candidates, and it's up to the client's organization to decide ultimately which candidate will receive an offer of employment. So don't take it out on a search professional by sending them a note after the interview, a negative note. The best thing to do is to thank them for the process and ask for feedback so that you can do better next time. I recently had a candidate write a note to me saying that our hiring manager was stupid for not hiring them, and nothing good can come from a letter like that. And when it comes to search consultants, don't forget that they could deliver your next job to you on a silver platter. So you'll want to build bridges, not burn bridges. And as we wrap up today's presentation, I'd like to quote something from the book, The Recruiter is Your Friend. This Ain't Your Granddaddy's Job Search by Kristen Hollows. She says, unlike a military raid, recruiters don't take hostages. They simply offer better opportunities for potential candidates to consider. Employees are not owned. They choose what is best for them and their families. If they opt to take advantage of a new opportunity, the shame should not be on the recruiter, but rather on the former employer for taking them for granted and not ensuring that the best opportunity was being delivered. Companies have accused recruiters for years of stealing their employees. But the truth is that nobody puts employees in a bag and then carries them across the street. People leave their jobs because they want to leave for a better opportunity, not because they are being forced to leave. And we've all heard this saying that it's not what you know, but it's who you know. And successfully making a transition and growing your career is all about networking. And in order to network, you should have a search consultant in your network. If you don't have someone in your network, then you should have a plan for finding someone and start building a relationship with them today. And keep in mind that working with a search consultant is all about timing. They may not have the ideal opportunity for you today or next week or even in 6 months, but in 2 or 3 years they can have an ideal job for you. And this is yet one more reason why your relationship with the search firm is one of the most critical relationships that you will have. Work with a search firm who has experience in your specific industry. If you are a veterinarian, you don't want to work with a firm that places accountants, for example, or engineers. You'll want to work with a search firm that has a proven track record of placing professionals with your qualifications and your background. So if you do have questions about today's webinar or about how to take the next step in your career, you can contact me in one of the following ways. I've got my email address and my phone number listed here. And Deborah, do we have any questions?
I've opened up the chat feature, so if you do have questions, feel free to go ahead and type those in the bottom left-hand portion of your screen. And also, I am monitoring our Twitter account as well. Please tweet any questions to @KSUMAB with the hashtag MABwebinar. I do actually have one already. The question is, does the 2 pages mentioned with the resume include references or not include references, Stacy?
I actually don't recommend putting references on the resume. I know people used to recommend that you say references will be furnished upon request, and that is something that I still see often on resumes. But that's almost an assumed thing. It's just a given. You know, we assume that people are going to have references and that they're going to provide them whenever the employer asks for them. So I don't recommend putting references on the resume, and actually references should not be checked, in my opinion, until the person is receiving an employment offer. Most companies don't check references until they're ready to make an offer of employment. So I would not put the references on the resume, and I don't even think it's necessary today to say references will be furnished upon request because that's just assumed. That's a really good question, though. I mean, I have worked with thousands of people over the last 18 years, and I've seen thousands of resumes. I've seen some very good resumes, and I've seen some really poor resumes. And just last night, I was looking through a stack of resumes, and several of the resumes I looked through after spending about 2 minutes, and like I said, most people only spend about 30 seconds looking at a resume, but I was looking at several resumes last night for a couple minutes, and I could not figure out what the person did. I looked at several resumes, and I said, if I cannot look at this resume in 2 minutes and figure out what this person does or what their qualifications are, this is not this resume, because the resume is a ticket to getting an interview. That's all the resume is. It's your ticket to getting an interview. The purpose the resume serves is to land you the interview. So if the person who's hiring or the recruiter can't figure out what you do from your resume, then it's not a very good resume. So the resume should be very clear, concise, to the point. It should speak to your accomplishments, not just list duties and responsibilities, but how well did you do your job? What did you accomplish? What did you do to benefit your employer or employers? Did you save them money? Did you make them money? Did you land them some new clients? What value did you bring to the organization? Because the person who's hiring and looking at your resume, they're going to be looking for the value that you have brought to other employers in the past, and that's how they're going to determine how you're going to benefit and value them. So you want to make sure that your resume, like I said, doesn't just list duties and responsibilities, but speaks to what you've actually accomplished and how you've benefited your employers up to that point.
Stacy, there is a question in the chat box regarding the name of the first book that you recommended.
The book, the Smooch Reynolds book. Let me just get that pulled up here. The author is Smooch Reynolds, and it's called Be Hunted. And like I said, the book has been around for a number of years, and I know, and I've read this book, I think 3 times, but the first time I read it, and I don't necessarily agree with everything in the book, because she does talk about the different types of search firms, retained firms, contingency firms, hybrid firms, etc. And our firm, we do contingency and retained, and we do a hybrid, which is a mixture, and I didn't really go into that today. But there are a lot of things that she mentions in the book that I really like about how to build and establish a relationship with search consultants and what they actually do and what goes on behind the scenes and how they can benefit you. Some of the things that I did not necessarily agree with is things like only working with a retained search firm or only working with a contingency firm, things like that, because in today's marketplace, we have clients that we'll have the same clients that we'll work with in our firm, and some of the searches that we'll work with them will be retained searches, other searches will be contingency searches. Especially for the high-level searches, the executive level, board level positions, C-level positions, those searches are more likely to be retained searches. But some of the lower level positions like field sales positions, for example, or mid-level management roles, companies may not want to hire retained search firms, so they might only work with a contingency firm. So that part of the book I didn't necessarily agree with, and I thought some of it is outdated, but I still like the book because of what she talks about building a relationship with search consultants and how to go do that. She provides some very valuable information there.
Stacy, can you see the question regarding trick questions?
I'll
go ahead and read it. I have a technical interview for a clinical job with a large corporate company. I've heard they ask tough and tricky case questions for their interviews. I'm experienced and confident in my skills, but I'm still nervous. Any recommendations or tips on the best approach to the tough and tricky technical interview?
Okay, so probably what they're talking about are behavioral-based questions. So we do see that a lot, especially with large corporations and especially with technical interviews. So they will ask situational questions, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to find out how you behaved or performed in certain situations. So they'll throw out an example such as, tell me about a time when you were in this particular situation, and they'll present a case. and then they'll ask you to identify a particular situation that you were in, what you did in that situation, what you learned, what the outcome was, and if you could do anything differently in the future, what would you change about the situation? Because companies believe that past behavior and performance is a good indication of future behavior and performance. So they're trying to find out how somebody behaved or performed in a certain situation. And so the best way to handle those questions, is the first and the hardest part is to try to recall a specific situation, because you'll ideally want to recall a recent situation and not something that happened 10 years ago. But if you don't have an example of something that happened recently, then it is okay to use something that happened a while ago. But the thing that you don't want to do in that situation is you don't want to make up a story or create a situation or come up with a hypothetical situation. You'll want to come up with the real true situation of what something happened, because the employer will really pick it apart. They'll ask a lot of very specific questions around the situation, and sometimes they'll even say, when this happened, what did you do, and what did this person do, and how did you respond? So sometimes they'll get into some very detailed questions about the situation. I also see that we have another question here. Somebody said, would you still recommend having a relationship with a recruiter if you were only looking for a part-time position after retirement? I would say yes, because just yesterday we got an opportunity with one of our clients for a part-time position. While our firm does mostly direct hire and long-term full-time positions, we don't do a whole lot of part-time positions. We do get some, and you never know. Sometimes companies, especially startup companies, might be looking for somebody in more of a consulting role, especially if they're later in their career. They might just be looking for somebody to work 20 hours a week or 20 hours a month. So we do hear about some of those opportunities. So it's always a good idea to at least be on the search consultant's radar, let them be aware of you and your qualifications and what you bring to the table, because you never know when somebody might be looking for somebody with your skill set, even if it's only part-time. Deborah, do you see any other questions on the Twitter feed?
I don't, but I was wondering if you could address some of the top issues you see with resumes, in addition to not being able to identify quickly the skills or what this person has done. Are there any other things that you see repeatedly that you would caution folks against?
A couple of things. One is that sometimes people if they're too wordy, they put too much information on their resume instead of making a point. It just goes on and on forever. Another thing that I see is that what I recommend is when they do the resume in reverse chronological order, that they list each position from their current position back to their earlier positions. And what some people will tend to do is they will do bullet points, or they'll do paragraphs of experiences that they've had, but they'll lump it all together. If they've worked for 5 employers, they'll put all that experience up front on the first page, but they won't list it under which specific employer that experience was with. So then when I try to figure out, okay, what position did they accomplish this in, and when did they do this, it's really hard. So I'd rather them just list each specific position that they've had and what they did and what their role was and what they accomplished with that specific employer and that specific job, and not me trying to figure out where this fits in, because those resumes are really confusing. Another thing that still surprises me is I will still see people with resumes with their birth date on it. I saw a resume in the last year where somebody put their Social Security number on the resume. Your Social Security number should never be on a resume, date of birth, marital status, children's names, children's date of birth. I've seen that. I don't recommend putting a picture on your resume. I mean, I know people are going to go to LinkedIn and social media. They're going to most likely look the person up, but it's very distracting to me when I have a resume with a picture, because I don't want to be distracted by what the person looks like. I want to focus specifically on their qualifications and what they've accomplished. Are they a good fit for the position. Sometimes, especially marketing professionals, people that are working in brand management or product management, director of marketing, they'll try to be really creative and clever with their resume, and they'll try to make it really high-tech and put graphics or just the formatting. And like I said before, when we try to put those resumes into our applicant tracking system, this is our applicant tracking system. They know what to do with data, but it doesn't know what to do with a picture or funny character or cartoon or graphic design. So then when we try to find the person's resume later and we're doing keyword searches, sometimes those resumes can get hung up and stuck and lost and buried in our applicant tracking system. So you want the format to be very clean, very well organized, your contact information very clearly at the top, your name, phone number, email, address, because the applicant tracking systems, when we parse the resumes, this data has to go into very specific fields. So it has to put your name in the right place and your company in the right place, and if it's all out of whack with the formatting, then it can go into the wrong spaces in the applicant tracking system, and then it's really hard to find the person's resume later. And that's why I mentioned with the PDF resumes, there are so many variations of PDF resumes, and they're very hard to parse, and when they parse, they don't usually go in very well, and so we convert them to Word, and then we parse them, and the format gets messed up. So I just prefer a really clean, well-organized, two-page Word document resume with no funny characters or weird formatting. And like I said, I don't recommend an objective statement, or because if your objective says, I am looking for a position as an R&D manager, but the company has an R&D director, or they have another position in R&D that's not exactly the one that's listed on your objective statement, then they might not consider you because they might think that you're not interested because you're only targeting this one type of position. So if you do a professional summary at the top that just highlights who you are and what you've done and what you bring to the table, and it doesn't need to be very long, just a short paragraph explaining this is who I am from a career perspective. That's what I want to see, just a summary at the top. This is what I've done. This is what I can offer, and then just the experience, like I said, in reverse chronological order, just each position, what you've done, what you've accomplished, how it's going to benefit the employer. And you just want to be very clear and concise, not too long, not too wordy. And you want it to be very easy to understand, because think about it too, that a lot of the people that are looking at these resumes when they come in are a lower level person in a human resources department. And I can give you some examples. And one of the things about having a search consultant on your side is that for example, when I deal with human resources, sometimes they come from other industries. There'll be a lower level staffing person in the human resources department that may not come from the animal health industry. And so I was working with one of those individuals once, and they were looking for somebody who had FDA experience, but they were specifically wanting to hire a candidate with CVM, the Center for Veterinary Medicine. And so I sent over a resume for one of our candidates, and on her resume she said she had experience with the FDA, but she didn't specifically put on the resume CVM, so it didn't actually say Center for Veterinary Medicine. So this person looking at the resume, she told me she's not qualified because I don't see CVM anywhere on the resume. And I said, no, she has worked with the CVM. That's part of the FDA. It's just not on the resume. So if I hadn't been there and understood this person's qualifications and been able to explain it, then if she had just received the resume, she would have put it in the no pile thinking this person was not qualified when they actually were qualified. It's very important that you have the right keywords on your resume. If you're applying for a specific job, look at the keywords that the company has listed in the job description, specifically in the requirements or the qualifications section, and make sure that, if you are qualified, make sure that you list all of those keywords on your resume where they're very visible so that the person can understand that you're qualified and they don't have to try to figure it out one way or the other, whether you're qualified or not. Somebody asked if a plain text resume is better than an MS Word. I recommend an MS Word versus a plain text resume. So Word resumes import very nicely if they're formatted well. We have no problem parsing MS Word resumes. And I think one of the reasons we have such a hard time with PDF is sometimes PDF, some of the versions look more like a picture versus the text, and so when they get parsed, and I'm not an IT person, so I don't understand all the ins and outs of this. I just know when we parse a lot of the PDF resumes, it's like a scan picture instead of, it's just hard for the applicant tracking system to take the information off the resume and get it into the right fields in the applicant tracking system. And also, I have a sample resume. If anybody wants to email me after today's call, I have a sample resume that I could send to you that I think is formatted very nicely, and you could actually use it as a template and just format your resume in this format. And it's one that works very well with most applicant tracking systems.
Any additional questions for Stacy?
Also, too, I was going to mention that on our website, we have a monthly newsletter that has a lot of career tips. We send out a newsletter the first week of every month, and every month we'll pick a topic, and it's not always related to a job search. It can just be related to your career in general, and so you can sign up for the career newsletter on our website. We have one for candidates and one for employers, and sometimes people sign up for both, especially if they're a hiring manager, but they're also open to looking at other opportunities. So you don't have to be in a job search to sign up for the newsletter, but we put a lot of tips in there, not just about job search, but also just general career tips.
I do want to thank everyone for joining us today. Stacy's information is here on this slide if you have additional questions for her. We will be making an archive of this webinar available after we are finished today, and that should show up in your email with a link. If you have questions about the Master of Agribusiness program, we would encourage you to reach out to us as well, www.ksu.edu, and we are the Master of Agribusiness program. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to networking with you in the future.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Deborah.